Hi everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about evidence interactions, all right? And this is when we've talked about a lot of causes of potential wrongful conviction already, right? Like eyewitness misidentifications, potential alibi issues, false confessions, and we'll talk about other ones as the semester moves along. But today we're going to talk about what happens when these things interact with each other in an investigation, all right? If you look at this chart, right, what's important to realize here, again, is if you actually add up these percentages, there's actually well over 100% of the exoneration cases are here. In fact, it's 168%. Now, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, how can there be something over 100%? Well, the reason for this is because the total is more than 100 because wrongful convictions can have more than one cause. And in fact, a lot of them do. A lot of them have multiple of these causes present together. And that causes someone to question, well, how could that happen? How could one investigation go so poorly? Is this something the police are doing? Is there something wrong with our system? Is it something that the person just had bad luck? What is the issue? And we find that really, in a lot of these cases, it's not necessarily any one person's fault. Nothing, like even eyewitness identifications, if the police are using bad lineup procedures, they don't necessarily know any better. In false confessions, as long as the police aren't literally beating someone to get a confession, they might not realize what they're doing actually is increasing the likelihood of a false confession even happen, right? And so we'll see here that there's actually a lot of innocent mistakes that happen, but that might be the cause of 3 or 4 or 5 innocence issues that are present. So some examples of evidence interactions in person witnesses specifically, right? In the Oklahoma bombing case, 2 eyewitnesses were influenced by another eyewitness and testified that they saw something completely different than who the Oklahoma City bomber was because of this third eyewitness. In Illinois versus Evans, eyewitnesses were influenced by false information about a confession. They were told, this guy confessed to the crime, is that the person that you saw? And they said yes. In New York v. Kogut, the same thing happened just with alibis, right? Mr. Kogut was at a party, at his girlfriend's birthday party actually, with about 50 people in a house. And after a 18 or 19 hour interrogation, he confessed to a murder at the same time of the party, and every alibi that was willing to offer him one changed their mind and said, never mind, I don't want to be his alibi anymore if he confessed. Wrongful conviction cases. In an analysis of the Innocence Project's first 241 DNA exonerations, 96.6% of cases contained informant errors. So virtually all of them. 94.5% of cases had forensic science errors. So virtually all of them. 3/4 of cases involved false confessions, and about half of the cases involved eyewitness errors, which means clearly there's a lot of overlap here on the different types of errors that are present in wrongful convictions, right? At some research on evidence interactions here. Here's a table pulled right out of a Casson et al. Article that shows that false confessions and eyewitness misidentifications had other errors present. When there was a confession, there was forensic science errors in 2/3 of the cases. And I want you to think about that. Forensic science is what we hold up as kind of this pinnacle of evidentiary standard, right? It's if there's DNA or if there's forensic science, it must be the person. And if there was a confession present in 2/3 of those cases, there were forensic science errors. And you see eyewitnesses. If an eyewitness identified someone, in 45% of those cases, the forensic science made an error as well. The order in which these errors happen also, you see that if a confession is collected first, it has a really good chance of affecting several other pieces of evidence, right? Eyewitnesses are next, informants are third. Right? And so you see here, like, depending on the order in which stuff happens, also affects all the other evidence down the line. A confession, like we've talked about before, being the most damning. So in some research on evidence interactions, they found that, why? Why is this happening? Like, why is it that this evidence interaction happens? And there are a couple different theories here by the authors, right? Subsequent witnesses were corrupted by mere knowledge of the confession and the cognitive confirmation bias resulting from the consequent belief in the suspect's guilt, right? So they now believe the suspect is guilty, and so as future witnesses are identifying him, they're like, well, if we know that's the guilty guy, that's who we got to identify because then we'll be right. And naturally, people just want to be right. Also, knowledge of the confession increased the witness's motivation to help the police and prosecutors implicate the presumed guilty suspect. we feel like as people, right, we're helping out. If I identify the person who I know already confessed, I can get the bad guy to get locked up for a long time and he won't victimize other people. I gotta help get the bad guy, right? And even police and prosecutors sought out support for previously taken, recanted, and disputed confessions, right? Even police and prosecutors have the same belief, much like juries do, and they're not bad for doing this, it's just natural human instinct, that if someone confesses, they must be guilty. And so even if they've recanted or there's disputed confessions, like, yeah, but they confessed, so now we know who the guy is, we just need to prove it, right? In some research that's been done, can co-witness, some research, right, here's an example of a study, can co-witness information change eyewitness testimony, right? Of 60 witnesses to crimes in the UK, co-witnesses were reported by 88% of the sample, right? So co-witnesses are a common event that happens, right? And in fact, the average number of co-witnesses was about 4. And so with that, right, if there's 3 or 4 of us standing around when a crime happens, we're probably going to discuss that, right? And in fact, about 60% of these people discussed the event with at least one co-witness before they made a identification. 52% discussed general crime details, and about 40% discussed the suspect's details, specific things about the suspect, right? And so there are different kind of methods of influence. There's normative influence, which is publicly agreeing but privately disagreeing. So for example, last semester, I taught research methods and Tina taught, I think, crimes against humanity last semester. For sake of argument, let's say she did, right? You might have someone who, when the fall semester starts, argues tooth and nail, no, Tina taught research methods and Dr. Behl taught crimes against humanity, right? Well, a normative influence would be like, okay, fine, I don't want to argue with this person. I'll publicly agree that that's fine, but privately, I'm not going to agree to that at all, right? This is kind of like what my wife and I do with each other also around the house, right? My wife likes to say that she does all the chores around the house, and in front of people to make her feel better, I'll say, yeah, of course my wife does all the chores. But inside, I know that that's not right. There's also informational influence, and this is publicly agreeing and privately agreeing because you looked to others for information. So, this is the case where 3 or 4 people might be standing in a circle talking, and all of a sudden a fight breaks out. And you turn around because it was happening behind you. You turn around and they say, oh my gosh, did you see that girl punch that guy in the face? And you might say, yeah, okay, I believe that happened. That's fine. I'm going to publicly agree, and privately I'm going to think that girl punched him in the face because I'm looking to these other people in the group for information who saw it. I just didn't quite catch a glimpse of it, but I'm sure that they have no motivation to lie. And then there's memory distortion, and you need to know this one for the exam because this one is the most damning, right? This is publicly agreeing and privately agreeing because your memory for the event was actually changed, right? And so this is where you had a clear view of what happened. Everyone around you was like, man, I can't believe that girl hit that guy. And you were like, wait, no, the guy hit the girl. And they're like, no, are you kidding? Did you not see what happened? The girl hit the guy. And you go, oh, okay, I must have missed something. Okay, yeah, the girl hit the guy. And your memory for the event is actually changing to where you don't even remember the guy hitting the girl. So, in research on evidence interactions, we beg the question, can biases change the evidence itself? And so in phase 1, there's a mock crime, and you make an identification from a target absent lineup. And again, that's a lineup where the suspect is not present in the actual lineup. And you give confidence in that identification. Then participants report back for phase 2, and they review the original identification decision, and they get feedback about the outcome of the investigation. They gave confidence in the original identification, and then were asked if they would like a chance to change identification decisions. So you could say, hey, you identified number 1 here in the lineup. We actually found out it was number 2, and we caught number 2. What do you think? Do you want to change our identification decision, or are you still sticking with number 1? And what we find when we do that is, well, first of all, we give them a bunch of different information, right? We might have said the person who you identified confessed, no one confessed, the person you identified actually denied doing it, or somebody else confessed. And when we ask if they want to change their confidence or their identification, what we find, this is just in confidence, that if the person they identified confessed, their confidence actually increases, right? So they actually say, I want to change my confidence level from a 6 to an 8. In the area where everyone denied, which is the second one, I know you can't see that there, under all denials, their confidence actually drops a little bit. In the one where it's personal, the person you identified denied it, their confidence drops also. And for the last category, when someone else actually confessed in the lineup, their confidence for their initial decision almost disappears, right? It virtually goes away. In other evidence, right, this is the percent of people who changed their decision. Now, last one was confidence. This is who changed their decision about whether or not the person identified is correct. We see that if the person who identified confessed, almost no one changed their mind. However, when you jump all the way over to when someone else confessed, over half of the people switched their identification to that other person, right? Because they didn't want to be wrong. So actually, the more I look at it, that is the guy who did it, right? And that can be a problem. And so in their confidence, right, some participants actually correctly rejected the lineup at phase one, right? It was a target absent lineup. So they said, no one here in this lineup is actually the person. For the participants who rejected the lineup at phase one, their confidence to change from phase one to phase two when they got other information, either all denials, unspecified other confessed, or specified other confessed, follows that same pattern, right? They're more confident because they say, look, everyone said no, the suspect isn't there. When an unspecified other confessed, they say someone here did confess actually. Their confidence drops, and when they say this is the person who confessed, their confidence disappears, right? And so again, there's more, the percent of participants again in the same pattern who rejected the lineup at phase one, right, but then decided to make another identification. Here, right, so they decided, I'm going to pick somebody else. Everyone, when in the all denial condition, not a single person said, never mind, I want to identify somebody. However, in the unspecified other and specified other conditions, if they said someone else here did confess, or this person here particularly confessed, about half of the people then decided to make an identification, right? So you see, initially, right when their memory is actually the strongest, they say, nope, he's not here. But then you throw a lineup in front of them again and say, actually, one of these guys confessed. Are you sure he's not here? And all of a sudden, almost half make an identification. When you say number 3 specifically confessed, are you sure that's not him? Exactly half said, yep, that's him. I remember now. Now, is that because their memory suddenly got better over time? Probably not, right? Probably the presence of that confession altered their memory, right? So why did people change their identifications? Well, we asked them, why did you guys change your identifications? Some people reconsidered their own observations or memory, right? His face now looks more familiar than the one I chose before, or this person's face actually matches more of the face I envisioned in my mind. And we know that's not true. We know that that can't happen, yet their memory actually has changed, right? And we know for a fact, actually, even with that first quote, his face now looks more familiar. We know recognition memory, it's about a 5-second thing. If they didn't recognize it at time 1, they're sure as hell not going to recognize it at time 2, right? Blind acceptance of investigators' information is another issue, and about half of the people said that. This is more of a normative influence, right? He doesn't seem like the guy I think I remember, but a signed confession is pretty hard to beat, right? I don't think that's actually him, but he confessed, so I guess so. So I'm going to publicly say it's him, even though inwardly I don't necessarily agree. Or just straight up, I was told number 5 confessed, guilty. That's all I needed to know. He said he confessed, he must have done it, right? So there's a possibility of multiple pieces of tainted evidence actually showing up at trial, right? The evidence is corrupted during the investigation. Then you add on to that this assumption of independence of evidence, right? And so we think an eyewitness is completely separate from a confession, so we don't need to have those two even worry about whether or not they play off each other, right? So the evidence is corrupted, we don't know about it, we assume there's no evidence interaction, and then there's a piece of evidence that taints the perceptions of other evidence, and that all leads to this perfect storm of a major problem for innocent suspects. Now, with all that being said, we know that there's this possibility of multiple pieces of evidence tainted at trial, but the Supreme Court doesn't think so. And this is one of the things we've talked about at the beginning of the semester about amicus briefs and other things that we need to do to help inform the court. This is one big area we need to do this. In Arizona versus Fulmonte in 1991, a wrongful admission of a confession is subject to a harmless error review, quote unquote harmless error, right? If, without the confession, overwhelming evidence established the defendant's guilt, reversing a verdict would serve no purpose because the error in admitting the confession actually had no effect. And so we're saying, yeah, okay, so we talked about a confession, but we shouldn't even talk about a confession. It has no effect. So, what is a harmless error? Does it influence legal actors, and if so, how so, right? Well, harmless error is actually a really, really bad safeguard, right? If a piece of evidence as powerful as a confession is found, and other evidence is interpreted as confirming that evidence, and other evidence can even be changed to confirm it, it's clearly not a harmless error. Yet, unfortunately, in our legal system, we call it a harmless error now, right? And this is one of the big areas where we need to change and adapt. So, as always, if you all have any questions, please let me know. Thank you all so much, and I will talk to you soon.